Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Mackenzie Walsh, and I'm a manager here at Remind. Today, we'll be discussing how you can take charge of how you manage communication across your organization with advanced messaging on Remind. Now, before we actually begin today's presentation, I do want to run through a few quick housekeeping items. First, you can actually access today's webinar by either phone or mic and speaker on your computer, as you can see in the audio settings at the right-hand corner of your screen. Keep in mind that you can ask a question at any time throughout today's presentation simply by clicking that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Finally, I also want to take note that we will be recording today's webinar. You can request this recording during the exit survey as we conclude the presentation, along with today's presentation slides, additional information about Remind, and other follow-up items. Now, without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce today's presenter, Emily Svan-Clem, who is a product manager here at Remind.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Mackenzie. Super excited for today's webinar. Just wanted to start with a quick overview of what we're going to be covering. We'll just start with an introduction of Remind. What is Remind? I think there are some of you who may be quite familiar with Remind. I know we even have a few current customers on the call who are interested in learning about these new features. But for everyone who's less familiar, we'll just cover that introduction. We're going to talk about Remind for schools and districts specifically, and then we'll dive into the advanced messaging features, which are really the focus of today's webinar. I want to cover some examples from other schools and districts who are using these advanced messaging features right now. And then finally, we'll leave plenty of time for questions. And please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. Mackenzie's going to be sort of jumping in with the questions as they get asked. So like she said, you can ask questions at any point. So quick overview, what is Remind? Remind is a communication platform that allows educators to reach students and parents where they are. It was started as a teacher communication tool. Specifically, teachers can use Remind to send announcements to their classes and then also to have two-way conversations with parents and sometimes students. Those messages can be sent from phones and received on phones, and personal phone numbers are never shared, so that personal contact information is kept private. And Remind was really built with our vision of giving every student the opportunity to succeed. We're built all around creating stronger relationships between teachers, students, and parents, so that teachers, students, and parents can work together in service of that student success. And Remind is used all over the country. Millions of teachers use Remind in their classrooms. About 60% of teachers in the US are using Remind for classroom communication. And many of these teachers are in Title I schools, kind of making Remind accessible to communities of all socioeconomic backgrounds has been important from the beginning. You don't need a smartphone or Wi-Fi to receive Remind messages, and so we're happy to see Remind being used in many different schools. Like I said, Remind started as a teacher communication tool. A couple of years ago, we introduced Remind for schools and districts, which is a paid plan that is really built with the goal of enabling Remind to be the single communication tool across a school or an entire district. And our Remind plans come with a whole bunch of additional features built specifically for school and district administrators. We have, big piece of it is ensuring that as a Remind plan organization, you're able to reach every single person in your community. So you can sync Remind with your student information system to automatically get every single staff member, parent, and student onto Remind so that you can start sending them messages through Remind. You also get delivery summaries to really feel confident that those messages are reaching your community. The Remind plan also is heavily focused around giving you as administrators the tools that you need to manage and protect your community. So you get a whole bunch of visibility into how your district or your school is using Remind already. And you get some statistics to sort of measure that over time with the goal of being able to understand and ultimately improve family engagement. You also get tools like message history access. All messages on Remind are stored for ever, and so if you need to access those messages between a teacher and a student or whatever it is for any reason, you have access to that as a Remind plan user. We have schools and districts all over the country who are using Remind plans, who have upgraded to this Remind plan, and who are really using Remind as the primary communication tool within their school and district. One thing that I forgot to mention when I was talking about teacher communication on Remind is that, just if you look back to that map that I showed, where you can see that there are millions of teachers all over the country using Remind. If you're interested in knowing what Remind usage looks like in your school or in your district right now, even if you haven't upgraded to a Remind plan, we can absolutely share that with you. And that's just something that you can indicate in the exit poll at the end of this webinar. There will be an option to tell us that you want to see that data if you aren't really sure how many teachers in your district are already using Remind or how they're using Remind. So
awesome. And actually, Emily, so I do want to pause here really quickly because we have had a couple of questions come in as well. The first question is, does Remind provide a translation feature for ELL families?
Oh, that's a great question. So yeah, we definitely have a translation feature, and this applies to the teacher communication and the school and district communication features. But basically, it's powered by Google Translate, unless you translate your messages into many different languages, over 90 different languages. So you could translate the message before you send it. Let's say you're specifically sending a message to Spanish-speaking families. And then our app is available in 6 different languages. So if families are using Remind in Spanish, French, German, Portuguese, Chinese, or English, they can automatically receive your messages in those languages. So there's a translate option for them right within the app.
Awesome. And one more question before we move on that Jessica just asked: how does Remind sync with or SIS? So would love for you to talk a little bit more about how we integrate with student information systems and how parents and students can opt in.
Great question. So we have a couple of rostering options. You can sync with Remind via Clever. So if your school or district is already using Clever with other tools, you can definitely use Clever to sync all your student information data with Remind. And then we also offer a direct sync option, which essentially is just a matter of transferring data from your SIS via SFTP. So we provide the specified format for that data, the columns that we need, and then you can set up an SFTP sync to send that data over to Remind on a recurring basis, so that we aren't just taking a snapshot of your student information system at the beginning of the school year, but we're updating that class enrollment as people move in and out of classes or add a new semester. And then one other thing to add is, in addition to that student information system sync, there's also an option to have parents and students opt in individually to classes or to the school. And we found that this is super helpful for extended families. So in the case where maybe there are additional caretakers who aren't in the student information system but should be receiving communication from teachers, or families that just moved and all their data isn't in the SIS yet. So definitely there are a few different ways to make sure that your entire community is on Remind and receiving Remind messages.
Awesome. And actually a quick follow-up question to that, since we're already on the topic of rostering. Great question from Megan. Is it easy to shift classes from individual plans to school plans? And are there limits to the number of classes that can exist on a school plan?
That's a great question. So yes, it's very easy to shift classes. When you go through the rostering process, there's essentially a merge flow that existing teachers will have access to. So either they can, they'll see sort of the new classes that are coming in through that SysSync, but they can choose to either accept those new classes or to keep their existing classes on Remind. So yeah, it's very much, just to sort of underscore that when we introduced these Remind plans in the first place, we already had a large base of free teachers who are using Remind. So it's really important to us that we make that experience as smooth as possible so that existing users are able to continue using Remind with no hiccups. And then to speak to the class limit side of things, so on the paid product, the limit is 100 classes. So any individual user can have up to 100 classes if they're part of a Remind plan, compared to the 10 classes that they can have if they are a free Remind user.
Awesome. Well, we've had a number of questions come in, but sit tight. We'll address these later. And Emily, so you can dive into advanced messaging.
Okay, great. So again, like I said, Remind built really around teacher communication to begin with. As we rolled out the school and district plans, it became clear that school and district-wide communication was another important need for us to address. Administrators' communication needs may be similar to teachers in some cases, but they also, many, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, but you have different communication needs as well. And so we added the ability to send a message to your entire school or your entire district, and to send messages to specific roles within your organization. So let's say a message is particularly relevant to staff members or should only be going out to parents. And it's really easy. You can compose these messages on your computer or right on your mobile phone. You just select your school or your district as the recipient for this message, type the message, click send, and then students, parents, staff members will receive those messages right on their phones right away. And something I want to highlight is that this communication going straight to people's phones through text messages or push notifications is just far more effective than alternatives, especially robocalls, which many schools and districts are still using. Unfortunately, many phone calls are not getting picked up. They're going straight to voicemail, and these voicemails are not being listened to. And you can compare that data to the data for text messages, which have really high open rates. And beyond being opened, they're also being read super quickly. 90% of text messages being read within 3 minutes of receipt, which means that really, if you send out a Remind message to your school or district, it's a great way to feel confident that that message is going to be read and read quickly. So we have this ability to message your entire school, your entire district, or roles within the school or district. This has existed for quite some time, and many schools and districts are using it. That being said, we know that not all messages need to go to the entire school or the entire district. There are lots of administrator type communications that are really just intended for a specific subset of students or parents in the organization. And furthermore, there are communication types that need to go out on a recurring basis. Maybe it's a message that needs to go out every single day to a different audience, talking about things like attendance notifications, lunch money balance notifications, detention notices. All of these things we know can become overwhelming and really hard to manage, so much so that in some cases they aren't getting sent, or they might be getting sent through less effective channels like email, because that's really just the way to get them out. And so that brings me to our advanced messaging features. This is our kind of newest premium feature offering, and we really built it with the goal of enabling administrators to reach specific groups of parents and students with timely, relevant messages. And this is all about sending messages that can actually make a difference. So with advanced messaging, and I'm going to go into the specifics of what this looks like, but just to give an overview, it allows you to integrate data from your student information system so that you can reach specific subsets of your organization. And there's an automation piece to that, all with the goal of making this communication easier for you, as easy as it is for your teachers right now. So I'm going to cover the 3 core features of this advanced messaging premium package. I'll give an overview of what those features are, and then we're going to dive into some use cases, some specific examples from schools and districts who are already using these features within their communities. So the first feature is something that we call message by student ID, and this allows you to send one-off messages to specific groups. So this is great for, let's say, something like sending a message specifically to the parents of students who haven't turned in their immunization forms. That's not a message that needs to go out to the entire district. That's not a message that needs to really go out multiple times per year. It's just relevant at the beginning of the year. It's a one-off need. And the way you would do this, super simple. You upload a CSV of student IDs that are pulled from your student information system. And you just upload those onto Remind, and then we will match those student IDs to students who are already on Remind because of the rostering process. You can choose whether the message should go specifically to those students or to their parents and guardians. If you choose parents and guardians, then we'll also match to the parents and guardians of those students. And then that's it. That defines the audience for the message. You get to type the message as you would any other message on Remind, click send, and that message is going to go out specifically to the correct students and or their parents and guardians. The second feature is called auto messaging, and this is really about allowing automation for those recurring use cases. So something like attendance notifications, lunch balance notifications, those are things that need to go out every month, every week, maybe even multiple times a day in the case of attendance notifications. And so it'd be really cumbersome to need to go into Remind, upload a CSV of student IDs, type your message every single time you want to send the message. So auto messages allows you to do some setup work at the beginning of the school year and then let these messages go out in the background, and you get to really focus on responses from students and parents and not on the actual work of sending the messages. And again, just an overview of sort of how auto messages works, what that initial setup looks like. Essentially, you kind of similar to rostering, but you're setting up an SFTP sync. You are going to just set up that sync to transfer a CSV of student IDs to Remind whenever you want a message to go out. So in the case of attendance notifications, let's say you want to send a list of student IDs for students who were marked absent every day at 9 a.m., set up that transfer. You define how you want the message to behave. So that's definitely the body of the message, what the message should say, also whether it goes to students, parents, and guardians, or both. And then you also have the ability to choose who the sender of the message is. You can choose from any other administrators. So this is super useful. I think a lot of times these auto messages are being set up at the district level or specifically by tech administrators. And so they can go in and specify that the message should come from the attendance clerk at a specific school. And that means that all of the setup can happen on the part of the tech coordinator, and the specific attendance clerk doesn't have to do any of the setup. They just get to receive replies from students and parents once those messages go out. So set up the auto message at the beginning of the school year. Once it's active, every time a CSV is received, that message will automatically go to the correct students, parents, and guardians. And you can always come into Remind and see a record of those messages that have been sent, see if there were any errors, and dive into those errors. Let's say a student didn't have a parent in the data set, or a student ID didn't match to someone on Remind. And then you can also see like our normal delivery summaries, which are available for all messages. You can see, confirm that the message was delivered to specific people, who read the message, and if there were any delivery errors, like if their, let's say their phone number is no longer active or something like that.
And Emily's, can recipients reply to auto messages?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's up to you and depends on how you set up the auto message. When you set that auto message up, or you or your tech coordinator have the ability to decide whether the message comes from the district as a whole, in which case, it's not coming from a person, there are no replies to those messages, or whether the message comes from an individual administrator, such as an attendance clerk. And if you have the message coming from an individual, then replies will be possible as long as that person has not disabled replies in their Remind account. And this is like largely, I'd say, of all the schools and districts who are using advanced messaging, replies are almost always being enabled because and we'll see in some of the examples, but schools and districts are actually wanting parents to be able to respond to an attendance notification with an excuse or a follow-up question instead of having to call the school.
Awesome.
Great. So just moving on to the final major feature here. So this is something that we are building right now. Message by Student ID and auto messaging are launched and being used by schools and districts, whereas this customization feature is in something that we're building in preparation for back to school. But this will allow you to personalize your auto messages with data that's specific to individual recipients. So this might be the specific lunch money balance that it remains in a student's account, or the total number of absences or tardies that they've had to date. But really it's just a matter of adding some additional data to the CSV that you're transferring to Remind, and then specifying how that data should be included in the body of the message. Some of you might be familiar with the concept of mail merge. This is really similar. And the whole goal here is to allow you to send messages that are even more relevant to the specific recipients. I'm gonna move on to some use cases. Like I said, these are all examples pulled from administrators or from schools and districts who are already using Remind. First off, attendance. This is probably the #1 use case that we're seeing so far. Daily attendance notifications, letting parents know that their student has been marked absent. Those are definitely going out. And then we're also seeing some additional attendance related use cases, such as a regular message to students struggling with or having a chronic absenteeism problem. These messages being used to let people know how many tardies they have, even messages, attendance related messages going not just to parents, but actually going to students and being framed more as a motivational type message to encourage students to show up. Advanced messaging is also being used for grade-related communication. Here are a couple examples around, just sending a message to the parents of students who've made the honor roll and inviting them to a recognition ceremony, and then also sending a message to parents of students who need some extra help, who have been asked to stay after school longer for some tutoring. And again, so these are great examples of messages that are just needing to go out to a specific subset of the school or district. Similarly, special events, message to students or parents who are participating in some kind of special event at the school. Behavior and discipline, we're seeing some examples of this. So letting parents know if their child has detention on a certain day. And then finally, another big use case that we're seeing is related to school lunch. So both around letting parents know if they need to turn in a school lunch form, can use advanced messaging that way, and then also letting parents know if lunch money, that balance is low, or if additional balance is needed. Auto messaging is great for that, because that's sort of or very much a recurring thing that perhaps needs to be checked every week or every month. So these are just a few examples from our existing customers. We, like Mackenzie said, you can request these slides in the exit poll. So if you do want to kind of better familiarize yourself with these examples, can definitely do that. I think I'm pretty excited. I think with customization coming soon, we're going to see even more use cases for these advanced messaging features. And I'm sure some of you are thinking of use cases that were not mentioned here, and we'd love to hear about those. If you have questions about how these advanced messaging features could be used for your particular use cases, we'd love to talk about that as well.
Absolutely. And also, you can also request the recording from the presentation during the exit poll too, to answer your question, Karen. Well, I know we're just about at time. One question that I do want to address before we conclude the presentation is pricing structure. What is the pricing structure for the Remind plan, and how much does advanced messaging cost?
Yeah, great question. So our pricing is really dependent on the number of students in your school or district and the extent of your rollout. So the best thing to do is to talk to someone from our team about your specific case. I will note that this advanced messaging, this set of features, is a premium feature that you can add on to the Remind plan. So sort of up to you whether you want to go with the base set of features or add on these advanced messaging features for your school or district. Again, just indicate in the exit poll if you want to learn more, if you want to talk to someone from our team about pricing for your school or district, and we can follow up with you quickly.
Wonderful. Well, Emily, thank you so much for presenting today. Thank you everyone on the line. I will launch that exit poll right now. Have a wonderful summer.
Yeah, and I think definitely we'll go through, I know we're at time, we'll go through the questions that were asked and make sure to follow up if anything didn't get covered. But thank you everyone so much for joining, and have a great day.
Great, thank you.